In today's video, we're going to look at how the wartime alliance and relations between the USA and Soviet Union unraveled between 1945 and 1946. So we need to take ourselves back to the Potsdam Conference, the third of the three meetings between the big three leaders. And remember at this, Joseph Stalin represented the Soviet Union. Winston Churchill had just lost the election, so was replaced by Clement Attlee, and Harry Truman had replaced Roosevelt at this conference, who recently died. So this was Truman's first big three meeting, as it was for Attlee. The most pressing issue at this meeting was the fate of post-war Germany. Okay, the Soviets wanted a unified Germany, but they also wanted Germany to be completely disarmed. Truman was growing increasingly distrustful, as were many in the US, of Soviet intentions in Europe, especially Eastern Europe. So remember, at this point, the Soviet army occupied many countries, or some countries within Eastern Europe, and in some respects, the USA felt a strong Germany might be the only obstacle in the way of Soviet domination of Europe. So the final agreement reached at Potsdam, as we will recall, was that Germany would be divided into four zones, one each for Britain, France, USA, and USSR, and also that the city of Berlin would also be divided, and Berlin sat within the Soviet zone. We'll also find out, though, that the atomic bomb was a massive issue at this conference, because Truman had found out on the eve of the conference this had been successfully tested. And he casually mentions this to Stalin at the meeting. This cartoon is called The Big Fourth, and political cartoons are really important to us in the study of history. They're always topical and focused on a key issue of the day. So as I've said, this cartoon was called The Big Fourth by the British cartoonist Philip Zeck, published on the 17th of July 1945, and that's a good starting point for us, the date, on the eve of the Potsdam Conference, and a matter of 2-3 weeks before the first atomic bomb was dropped on the 6th of August 1945. The cartoon contains an important message written onto this massive atomic bomb that we can see: the terrible weapons of future wars unless agreement is reached on world policy. So this is the cartoonist speculating on what may happen if agreement isn't reached at Potsdam. And this cartoon is all about the Potsdam Conference. You can see the atomic bomb sat in the middle of a table, or on the table. And around the table you've got written Big Three and meeting at Potsdam. So we know that this is about the meeting at Potsdam, and we know that the Big Three are the leaders of the USA, USSR and Britain. And the bomb itself is casting a shadow over the conference table, just as this weapon would cast a shadow, or could cast a shadow, over the post-war world. So the atomic bomb has a massive impact on US-Soviet relations after the Second World War. And what I've done here is I've sequenced that information, much like you would sequence information if you were writing an analytical account of the impact of the atomic bomb on US-Soviet relations. So first of all, the USA uses the atomic bomb. First of all, on the 6th of August 1945 over Hiroshima, and then on the 9th of August explodes a second bomb over Nagasaki in Japan. The blast at Hiroshima was equivalent to over 12,000 tons of TNT that is used in ordinary explosives. Over 120,000 Japanese civilians were killed by the two bombs. So this shows to us that the USA used the atomic bomb and it had great power. Now, some historians question whether the atomic bomb was needed and say that it wasn't needed to defeat Japan, and that actually the USA was using it to establish a stronger bargaining position over the Soviet Union. And certainly knowing that it had the atomic bomb made the USA more powerful. And certainly it made Truman feel more confident and determined in his negotiations at Potsdam. However, we also know that when Truman told Stalin about the atomic bomb, he merely replied by saying he hoped he used it to bring a speedy end to the war in Japan. But the atomic bomb was certainly important for Western security. It made the countries of Western Europe feel more secure about placing themselves under US protection rather than looking into agreement with the Soviet Union. However, whilst thinking it would lead to greater security, actually it has the opposite effect on US-Soviet relations to what the USA had hoped for. So instead of persuading Stalin to let Eastern European countries have more freedom, it actually made Stalin even more determined to make the USSR secure by creating a buffer zone of countries sympathetic to communism. Now, the USA's nuclear monopoly does not last because it also made Stalin more determined to have his own, and Soviet scientists were already working on their own version of the atomic bomb, which was successfully tested on the 29th of August 1949, just 4 years after the USA. This then ultimately leads to the consequence of increasing Cold War tension. So the potential consequences of using an atomic bomb made the USA and USSR reluctant to go to war, but also the impact was that both sides entered an arms race to be the most powerful country. So we're going to see how these tensions continue to rise. First of all, starting with what was perceived to be the Soviet attitude, as noted in George Kennan's long telegram. Now, a telegram is a message sent by telegraph wire. It's normally very short, but George Kennan's telegram is a very long message, more like a letter, hence its nickname. Now, George Kennan was the American ambassador to Moscow, living and working in the Soviet Union, and as a diplomat, his views were taken very seriously. So he discussed US-Soviet relations, and he reported the belief that Stalin wanted to see the destruction of capitalism, but he also felt that the Soviet Union and Stalin saw that the outside world was hostile to it and wanted to destroy communism. But he also said that the Soviet Union wasn't suicidal and would perhaps back down in the face of a challenge. And this leads to what's known as the US policy of containment, which I'll discuss in a later video. Now, also, the Soviet Union had a diplomat, Novikov, in the USA, and he sent a telegram to his government, which helps to increase our perception of what the Soviet Union thought of the West and shows the distrust. In his telegram, he said that the USA wanted to use their massive military power to dominate the world, and that since the death of Roosevelt, this spirit of wanting to cooperate with the USSR had come to an end, and that the American people would support their government and would perhaps go to war. This had a major impact in Moscow and increases the Soviet Union's desire to have a buffer zone of protection in Eastern Europe. Now, further thrown into the mix is a famous speech known as the Iron Curtain speech by Winston Churchill. By this time, Winston Churchill is no longer Prime Minister, but he makes this speech in the USA. It would have to have been ratified by the US President for him to have made this speech, so it's seen as representing the American view. And it talks about an Iron Curtain descending across Eastern Europe, and explains that the Soviet Union was a threat to freedom and world peace. Churchill felt provoked to make this speech by the fact that communist governments had recently been set up in Hungary, Poland, Romania and Bulgaria. So in his speech he says, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent. Behind this lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. All are subject in one form or another, not only to Soviet influence, but to a very high and in some cases increasing measure of control from Moscow. And this speech can be characterized by the cartoon that we see here. We can see Winston Churchill at the bottom of the cartoon peering under the Iron Curtain that he described in his speech, and that Iron Curtain seems to run the length of Europe, and we can see that it splits Europe by the fact that the word Europe is partly cut off and partly under the Iron Curtain. Across the curtain is written no admittance by order of Joe, Joe being Joseph Stalin, and this no admittance is keeping out the West. And behind the curtain we have what we call the communist satellite states, which we'll find out about in my next video. We can see the Soviet flag in the background, we can see soldiers on top of the curtain. Perhaps equally telling is the fact that there's people other than Churchill looking at the Iron Curtain. There's a man running away, perhaps symbolising running away from communism, and the The far end of the curtain, furthest away, seems to represent war-torn Europe. It looks damaged, as if to suggest what Europe is damaged and perhaps other countries will fall behind the Iron Curtain as a result.